Hi everyone, welcome back to Kira's Corner, or welcome to if you're new. As you can see, I'm not in my usual space. It is currently Christmas break. I went home. This is where my parents and the rest of my family live. So that's what all this is. We deal. Figuring out a filming setup for this was way too hard. But I'm back for another video. It's only been like 6 months, The last videos I posted were my best and worst books and movies of 2024 so far. I looked at all the books I read, all the movies I watched from January to June. Yes. Yes? June. And I gave you my 5 best and my 5 worst with a couple of honorable mentions. And since it's the end of it's officially 2025 as of filming, so I can do the rest of my best and worst. So I could have done my best and worst of the year, but I decided I would just do the second half because I feel like I would be repeating a bunch of stuff I said in my last video. So this will just be the best and worst of the second half of the year. So everything that I have read and watched from July to December. This video in particular is going to be the books I read. I had a pretty great second half of the year when it came to reading. Had lots of good books. I got through a ton this last week and a half because I got my first ever Kindle for Christmas. I'm so excited. I have been flying through a bunch of stuff on Kindle Unlimited. So that's great. But none of the books I've read in the last 2 weeks made it to my best and worst. Don't get me wrong, I read some really good books that I would really love to talk about in a different video. Maybe. But for now, we're just going to do my best and worst books of the year, of the second half of the year. So yeah, let's get into it. Right. Like I did last video, what we're going to do is I'm going to briefly go over my honorable mentions. And last time I spent a lot of time on my honorable mentions. This time I'm not. I'm just going to give them to you. I'm not really going to give you any sort of, I'll maybe give you what genre they are and a little bit about it. But other than that, I'm not. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the hair on my scrunchie. Sorry. I'll give you a little bit about it, probably not much, and then move on. I'll also give you star ratings for my honorable mentions. I had lots of 4.25 stars reads this year. And so two of my top 5 are actually 4.25. I just like them a little bit more, or I just really, really wanted to talk about them more in depth. So my 2 honorable mentions are The House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Crescent City series. Surprised me a little bit, I'm not going to lie. I read ACOTAR this summer as well. I read the entire thing. And I enjoyed the last 3 books. I know Akasif, of the last 3, it's not my favorite, but Aka Moth and Aka War I really liked. I still gave all of them 4 stars, I think, so I won't be talking about this. But I had heard that Crescent City kind of reads, or it's kind of like trashy reality TV, and I love a good trash reality TV. And I did. I thought this was great. I loved it. I had a lot of fun with it. I did listen to it on audio. That's the other thing, is I do a lot of audiobooks simply because I can listen to it at work and it's great for my commute. I love an audiobook. So yes, House of Earth and Blood. We have Bryce. She's our female main character. She's half fae, half human. And then we have Hunt, and he is an angel, sort of. The world kind of confusing, I'm not gonna lie. There's angels ruling over this world. There's a bunch of different types of creatures that were brought to this world. I'm not entirely sure, but it was still fun. Had a good time with it. 4.25 stars for House of Earth and Blood. I will be continuing. I know it gets worse from here, so I have set my bars low for the next couple books. My next honorable mention is Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was the last one I had left in her most recent backlog. So this one I was really excited about because I heard such good things about it, and I did really, really like it. So we have our female main character is Daphne, and she ends up having her fiance break off the engagement to get with his best friend, who happened to be in a relationship with our male main character, Miles. And so Daphne and Miles end up moving in together, and it's fun from there. Very bantery. I gave it 4.25 stars. I think I've pretty much given every Emily Henry 4. Beach Read is still my favorite. That's a 4.5. Or maybe Beach Read is 4.75. I can't remember. But Funny People, Book Lovers, Happy Place, and People We Meet on Vacation is a 4. But the other 3 are all 4.25, and it's really hard for me to choose between them. Although, I will say this. I saw a reel shortly, maybe like a month and a half after finishing Funny Story, about someone giving a fan cast of Funny Story because Emily Henry books are getting made into movies. I'm literally so excited. But someone had casted Miles as Dylan O'Brien, and I haven't been able to take that out of my head since finishing the story. And like thinking back on it, I'm like, oh, Dylan O'Brien would be so good as Miles. But yeah, I love Emily Henry. She never really disappoints. And those are our honorable mentions. Another 4.25. Highly recommend both of those. I have tons of stuff that I'd love to recommend and talk about, but this video would then be 3 hours, and we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. I do have a Storygraph, and that's where I log what I read. If you'd like to see what books I've read and what I've rated highly, I can link that down in the description box below, and you can check that out. But we're going to now move on to going back and forth between my worst and my best, because we want to end on a high note. All right, number 5 on the worst books I've read in the second half of the year, we have Flawless by Elsie Silver. This is the first book in the Chestnut Springs in an interconnected standalone series. Gave it 3.5 stars. So here we go. We go a little bit more in depth with these books. Cowboy romance. We follow Rhett Eaton. He is a professional bull rider, and he is a bad boy cowboy, guys. And he's been getting into issues, fights, and all these sort of things. And so he's having issues with sponsors. And so his agent makes him pretty much have a babysitter with him at all times, and that being our female main character, Summer. They don't like each other. Mainly because he thinks it's dumb that he has to basically have a babysitter. But Summer is really good for him. She has to move in with him, but he lives with his dad, and they live on a ranch. And really, there's only one rule. Summer is Rhett's agent's daughter. And so the agent's like, don't touch her. Of course, it's whatever. My thoughts. I didn't love it. I also have heard, though, that this is like not a lot of people's favorite of the series. But I also read the second one, Heartless, and I didn't like it all that much more. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not a cowboy girly. But I don't even know if that's it. I don't know. Maybe it's just they're really lusty. All the boys, the 2 I've read, Rhett and then Cade in Heartless, are pretty lusty, it feels like, and I'm just not a fan. I prefer more of a yurt and more of a slow burn, and these ones weren't that. So I don't know. It's just maybe not for me. I mean, they were relatively quick. They were on Kindle Unlimited, which was nice. So I don't know. Like it wasn't my favorite. I gave it 3.5 stars, which is like okay, but like that was Flawless by Elsie Silver. Now, 5 on the good side of things. I get so excited about 5 on the good side of things. We have Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola. I probably am butchering the pronunciation of that, and I apologize. But this book was really good. I gave it 4.25 stars. This is a contemporary romance, and the reason I picked it up actually was because it's a Reese's Book Club pick. I will say this last half of the year, I didn't have like as good of a Reese's Book Club pick reading journey. The first half of the year, I had lots that I picked up that were Reese's Book Club and then ended up loving, and I didn't have as many the second half, but it's fine. Now, what is Honey and Spice about, you ask? So, it's a contemporary romance. We follow Kiki, and she is a Black student who goes to this pretty white college called Whitewall, and she is this host of a very popular student radio show called Brown Sugar. Now, what this radio show really is she wants to make sure that the women of the African Caribbean society at Whitewall don't get into situationships, the mess of dealing with players, getting their heart broken, ultimately. That's Kiki. She's very much a girl's girl. We like Kiki. However, at a party, it was at a party, she was trying to get away from a guy that she was sleeping with. desperately, like, this guy, not a fan, but somehow, I don't know, the whole reason that they were sleeping together, I still eludes me. But she kisses Malachi, who is our male main character. The problem with this is that she had gone on earlier on her radio show saying that Malachi was the ultimate player at White Wall. And so everyone's very confused as to why she would kiss him at that point. Because she's the ultimate don't do this. It's just a mess. They decide to fake date in order to kind of restore both of their reputations. And that's what that is. It's so good. I had no idea what this book was going into it. I thought it had a pretty cover. Pretty cover, right? And I ended up loving it. The audiobook was really good. I really, really liked it. Kiki was such a fun character. She's very much a girl's girl, and it's really fun to kind of read that. And then Malachi is really just a sweetheart, as per usual. Like, most of the time in these things, the ultimate player is not that playery for the most part. And it was just really good. It wasn't overly smutty from what I remember, which I appreciate. And yeah, it was just like a nice surprise because it had never even been on my radar before. It was just one of those books that was available and I picked up because I needed something to listen to at work. That literally was the only reason I picked it up, and then ended up loving it. I thought about it so much after reading it. It was in my head for weeks probably. But yeah, highly recommend Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola. I am so sorry about butchering your name. I'm so sorry. Now back to the bad, unfortunately. We have number 4, The Final Gambit by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is the 3rd book in the Inheritance Games series, and it was the last book that I read because the 4th one sounded like trash, and I already didn't like this one. I gave it 3.5 stars. It's a YA mystery, kind of, I think, and I'm not going to say anything about it because it's the 3rd book in a series, and I don't talk about books after the 1st one, just so that I avoid any way of spoiling anything if you want to read it. So here's the problem. I don't remember much about this book to begin with because I didn't like it that much. And the more I look back on the Inheritance Games as a whole, the less I like it. I originally gave the first 2 3.75 stars, and I would definitely lower them both to 3.5 at this point. Just looking back on it, I'm not fond of it. I didn't really like any of the characters. I hated the love triangle. I never liked that. I don't know, like, I wanted to be Knives Out and it wasn't. That's what I wanted out of this series, and it just wasn't giving that, unfortunately. So yeah, I didn't even bother reading the Brothers Hawthorne book. I was like, I don't care. I just don't care. However, I did pick up The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes and loved it. Not going to talk about it in this video, but I will say it was so good, and I'm glad I gave her a chance. That one also is a love triangle that I'm not a fan of because she's already picked the guy I didn't want to pick. So that's the other thing. I'm like, I feel like me and Jennifer have different ideas of who our female main character should end up with. But who knows? I am 2 books deep into the Natural series. There's 2 more to go. Both are not on Kindle Unlimited, which sucks. So I actually have to purchase them or find them somewhere for free. But it's okay. We move on. The Final Gambit, Jennifer Lynn Barnes, 3.5 stars. Probably wouldn't recommend. Now, number 4 on the good, we have Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. This also got a 4.25. This is, I think, a contemporary romance, but it's not your typical contemporary romance. At least in my mind, it's not. So we follow Magnolia Parks. She is a rich socialite in London. London. Yeah. And then we also have BJ Ballantyne. He's a rich kid in London. And these two have loved each other pretty much their entire lives, but they're super toxic. They're on and off all the time. And this just kind of follows how the relationship evolves a little bit and how they interact with each other, what they mean to each other, all that good stuff. Marketing wise, a lot of time people will say this is like Gossip Girl. And I get that vibe because it's rich kids doing dumb stuff all the time. But there is no like Gossip Girl from really what I remember about it. Now, this series is really good. I read the second one, Daisy Hates, recently, and that one was also so good. The characters are so interesting because they're almost hateable that you love them, Like Magnolia actually gets on my nerves, but I love her at the same time. And BJ makes stupid decisions all the time that bother me, and yet I love BJ. And then there's a bunch of side characters too that are pretty good. It really is just such an interesting read. I read this actually coming back to Winnipeg. I had come home for a wedding, and then I had to take a train to the airport, and I read it on the train. It was so fun. But it was so good, I could not put it down. I got through it actually pretty quickly, and I just loved it, and I can't wait to keep going with the series. But it's just so different to anything I felt like I'd read up until that point. It's just, oh, the toxicity is so real. These characters, it's weird to think that these characters love each other because they make such weird decisions in regards to each other. It's just a strange time. I would highly recommend. Daisy Hates was also very good. I appreciated that one a lot as well. I have Into the Dark. Is it the next one, Into the Dark? Whatever the next Magnolia Parks one is, I have that one on hold. It should come in a couple of weeks, hopefully. Fingers crossed. But I'm looking forward to it. That's Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. All right, number 3 on the bad. We have Did You Hear About Kitty Carr by Crystal Smith Paul. I gave this one 3.5 stars as well. So this one is a literary fiction book. This was a Reese's Book Club pick, unfortunately. The vibe I got while reading it was kind of like Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but not at the same time. So this one, we have Kitty Carr, who is this famous white woman of the silver screen, and she basically bequeaths her entire estate to these 3 black girls. And this just brings up questions on why did she give this money to them, as it seems that there's no relation. And so we go back and forth between the past and the present, the past being Kitty's life and the present being one of the 3 sisters named Elise. And during this, we learned why Kitty gave them the money. Now, in essence, it was a fine book. I didn't despise it or anything. By any means, I didn't despise it. It was just fine. It was a little bit like white noise for me at work. I had one of those books in the beginning half where I just couldn't really care. I didn't really like any of the characters. I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. And it's fine. If you're interested, read it. It's fine. But I won't go back to it anytime soon. I haven't really thought about it since I read it. So, there's things. And of course, everyone is open to their own opinions on books. Just for me, this one was a miss. All right, number 3 on the good. We have Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. This one gave 4.5 stars. I loved this book. So this one is a contemporary romance, and we follow Sadie. She is a painter, specifically a portrait artist, and she is not really doing so hot in the artistry world, but she does make it as a finalist in this crazy cool portrait competition. It's pretty major. It's one of the biggest things she's ever done. However, shortly after receiving this news, she literally crashes into a car, I believe. She's crossing the street and a car crashes into her. And she ends up having temporary facial blindness, which means that she can see faces, but she can't put the pieces of a face together to even recognize it. And so she can see faces, but she doesn't recognize anybody. She doesn't recognize her stepmom, her stepsister, her mom, anyone in the apartment complex she lives in. She doesn't recognize anybody. So it's super fun for her. But the problem is that she needs to paint a portrait for this portrait contest, and she can't connect the pieces to make a face-to-face. So it's a real hard time for her. However, she meets 2 men during this time. We have one living in her apartment named Joe, and then we have another one being her dog's vet named Oliver. And she ends up falling in love with both. And you can kind of figure out from there. It's pretty predictable for the most part. But I loved it. It was my favorite Catherine Center book I read this year. I also read The Rom-Commers by her, which was also really, really good. And then I can't remember if I read The Bodyguard in the first half of this year or the second half, but that one was also good. That one was a wild one to end. Hello Stranger was really, really good. I loved it. Thought it was pretty funny. She writes banter really well. And it just it was pretty clear, pretty early what was going on with the romance side of it. But I kind of just let it go because it was kind of like a cozy, fun read. I had a fun time with it. laughed out loud multiple times throughout the book. I really, really enjoyed this one. Sometimes I just like a predictable read that it just fills my time and I enjoy it. Also, I'm pretty sure there was no smut in this. If I remember correctly, there was no smut, and I appreciate it always. 4.5 stars. Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. Would highly, highly recommend. Pretty much anything she writes, I would recommend. So, yeah, moving on. All right, number 2 on the bad, we have Caraval by Stephanie Garber. Gave this 2.5 stars. So there's really only one reason that I am even reading the Caraval trilogy, and that's because I've heard that maybe you should read it before reading Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy, which I do actually want to read. That one sounds interesting to me, and I've heard that it's a great romantasy. My best friend, my bestie, Annika, has the entire Caraval trilogy, hated it, thought it was reality garbage, and so I can just borrow things from her, but I needed to take a break after Caraval because I actually got annoyed. I gave it 2.5 stars, and this is what it is. It is a YA romantasy, and we follow Scarlett. Now, Scarlett has always dreamed of attending Caraval, which is this once-a-year performance that happens on this island, and the audience gets to participate in the performance itself. And she's dreamed about going, and it turns out that she's actually been in contact with Legend, who is kind of the operator of Caraval. And it looks like she'll never be able to go because her father arranges a marriage for her. However, this all changes because her sister Tella, my notes say Tella, gets kidnapped. And so she and this sailor that Tella was hanging out with named Julian go to the Caraval Island to save her because they believe that she's been kidnapped by them. And, it's romantasy with these two characters. You kind of figure it out. I just really hated Scarlett. I actually hated Scarlett. She was so dumb. She was one of the dumbest characters I've ever read. And and of course, I was listening to it audio because I was working, and I was literally sending my friend voice notes of being like, this is one of the dumbest things I've ever read. I'm just like, what the frick, dude? What's happening? It's very confusing on who Julian actually is and what's going on. I'm like, how do we move on? I'm so lost half the time, and I'm like, Scarlett's the worst. She makes dumb decisions. Tella is decent, okay. She's not my favorite, but she's better. Here's the main problem. Scarlett thinks she's all that in a bag of chips. She's not at all, and not even close to a bag of chips. She's actually just a nobody and is not good at anything and is dumb. And I was just not a fan of that this time around. I can normally get behind it, but this time around I couldn't. Sorry, I was just making sure that my mic was on. Because that would have been horrible. So yeah, that's Caraval. Will I be continuing? Yes, because I do need to find out what happened. It's one of those things where I'm like, I'm gonna hate all these books, but I just hope that they get better, and at least I'll figure out what happens. So Caraval by Stephanie Garber gets a 2.5 from me, and we move on. Back to the good side of things. Number 2 is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's got a 4.75 stars from me. This I read early in July, I believe. It was one of the first books that I read in the second half of the year and loved it. This is a historical fiction, and it is written in the style of documentary interviews, kind of, which is super cool. Let's actually get into this a little bit. In this book, Daisy Jones and the Six were this super popular band in the 70s, and they had a really massive breakup, and nobody knows what happened, why they broke up. None of that is known, except for the members. And so this documentary is hoping to answer those questions and just give the people the history of the band, what happened during the good years, and then what led to the downfall and ultimate breakup of the band. The interviewees include Daisy Jones, all of the members of the Six, which was a separate band before Daisy Jones joined in, as well as other important people that worked during that time as a group, as well as some partners and stuff like that. First thing of note, I read this on audiobook. Recommend listening on audiobook. This was such a good audiobook. This is maybe my favorite audiobook I've ever read, and it's just so good because every character gets a different narrator. That's the best part about this, is that every single character gets a different narrator, and because it's a documentary of sorts, we're jumping between interviews, and so it's nice to know that I'm listening to a different character speak because I'm hearing a different voice. And the cast was also so good on that audiobook. So if you're reading Daisy Jones and the Six, I would highly recommend listening to it on audio. It is on my wish list of like a physical copy to buy because I loved this book so much. This was a good Reese's Book Club pick. I really liked Taylor Jenkins Reid in general. I've read a couple of her books already at this point, and I really enjoyed all the ones I had read for the most part. One True Love's not my favorite, but that's whatever. So I was really happy with this book. I had a lot of fun. I thought about it constantly. Originally, I'd given it like a 4.25, but I realized as time went on that like this thing would jump into my head all the time. I thought about this book constantly, and I realized I needed to up my rating big time because it had like it just stuck with me for so long. Plus, I watched the Prime show, and I really liked it. I really liked the Prime show. I thought it did a good job of the book. The casting was really great. I really liked that. And the songs were so good. I have the soundtrack downloaded, listening to it on occasion. There was some changes, obviously, as most adaptations will have a change of some sort, and I didn't mind the changes. So overall, loved, loved, loved Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Quick water break. I got a new water bottle as well. It has a straw. Anyways, on to the book. All right, worst book. I have read this in the second half of the year, and that is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I gave this 2.25 stars originally, lowered that to 2 because I thought about it and I realized how much I hated this book. It is another literary fiction, and it from this it sounds like I only really read romance. That's a lie. I read a lot of other things. It's just I had not great times on the literary fiction end of things and pretty good on the romance end of things in the second half of the year. But anyways, that's beyond the point. Conversation with Friends. We follow a girl named Frances and her relationships with her best friend Bobby, as well as the married man she's having an affair with named Nick. Other than that, I don't know. This was my first Sally Rooney book. I've decided I don't like her, which is nothing against Sally Rooney. I didn't like her writing style. I hated the no quotation marks. That's kind of like her thing, and I hated it personally. And I just hated Frances. I I don't know. I just thought she was annoying. I thought she was rude. I didn't like her at all. Her relationships with everyone around her just felt weird. And while there was something very human about her in a lot of ways, it just caught me off guard and I just didn't like it. It took me so long to get through that book. And I almost wanted to DNF it, but I was like, I gotta give this thing a chance. I physically bought it. I was like, I just need to get through it. Okay. And I did. And I didn't end up liking it anymore from the start to finish. So, like, it's hard because I've heard mixed things. And it's either like you love Sally Rooney or you don't. And I wouldn't mind reading Normal People, but I don't know if I could really read anything else right now by her. It's just not, it didn't click with me and I didn't like it. That is to say, people who like her, I don't like, no hate. It's just not for me personally, but that's going to be the worst book I read in the second half of the year. Conversation with Friends by Sally Rooney. All right, best book I read in the second half of the year. I actually brought it up in my first half of the year wrap up reading thing with Jake, and it is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I mentioned I bought the physical copy, and I did. I wish I had it here with me so I could have like a little thing to prop it up with, but unfortunately, it's in Winnipeg. I talked about being really excited for it. I'd heard really good things, and it was so good, guys. I gave it 5 stars. It was so good. This is my favorite Abby Jimenez. Like, Abby Jimenez is one of my favorite readers, like favorite authors right now, and I love her so much. Okay, let me talk about the actual book for a second. This is a contemporary romance. We follow Justin, who posts on Reddit about this thing that keeps happening in his life that he calls a curse. He says that every woman he dates goes on to find their soulmate after they break up. And it just so happens that Emma seems to have the same problem. And so she DMs Justin. It's like, hey, have the same problem here. They joke around and say that if they dated each other, then broke up, that means that their curses would cancel out and they would both go on to find their soulmate. Now, this actually ends up happening. They decide to actually do this because one of Emma's friends is like, you got to do this, girl. Like, come on, this would be so cool. And her and Emma are actually traveling nurses. So they decide to go to Minnesota and they end up working in the same hospital that Bree works at and that Alexis did in Part of Your World and Yours Truly. And so we get a bunch of characters from some of those books as well. This idea of them dating, it comes with a lot of rules. They set up a ton of guidelines, but all in all, they start to date when they're in Minnesota. They're really, really cute. However, they both have complicated relationships with their parents, as Emma has a really toxic mom, doesn't know her dad, and Justin's dad died, and he's about to go take guardianship of his younger siblings because his mom is going to prison. Yeah, that threw me for a loop. No one told me that was going to happen. So, complicated relationships with parents. There's a lot of hard stuff to talk about, especially with parents. So, trigger warnings for any sort of complicated, toxic relationships. This is such a good book. First of all, yes, it is funny. It's the same vibes as both Part of Your World and Yours Truly, which I both adored. And the characters I really, really loved. I loved Justin and Emma. I thought they were super, super cute. Normally, I'm not. Sometimes it's hard for me to decide if I'm really into like friends to lovers or the like kind of insta love. And I don't know if it's fully, fully insta love, but Justin falls very quickly. But this time I liked it. I don't know. I loved this book so much. I thought about it for ages. I love that I have a physical copy. Thank goodness Past Year did that. I loved it. But yeah, I got through that book pretty quickly actually, which is hard when I'm reading a physical book and I was working a lot because when I got home, sometimes I didn't want to read. I was like, I just need my brain to fully shut off, and that meant watching TV because that takes absolutely no brain power to do. But Just for the Summer was, oh, it was just so good. I loved it so much. How was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez? 5 stars, only 5-star read, I think, this entire year. Great. And that's the video. Tell me your thoughts down below. Comment. Like the video if you did. Like it if you didn't. Doesn't hurt you. Just helps me. I know it's been a long time since I posted. I'm hoping to get a couple of videos out within the next couple of months. I'm filming a bunch while I'm at home actually, so hopefully I'll have more videos coming out soon and I won't wait another 6 months. So no promises, of course, as my excuse always is. Student, busy. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for making it through. I hope this video isn't too long. Appreciate it. I guess I'll see you next time in Kiara's Corner.